Our next speaker is Dr. Jacob Shatzer. He's the Associate Dean of the School of Theology and Missions and an Associate Professor of Theological Studies at Union University. He graduated from Union in 2007 and has served at Union since 2017. He's an ordained Southern Baptist minister. Are you really? Wow. And an assistant editor for Ethics and Medicine and a consultant for BibleMesh. He's got a book, which I read, called Transhumanism and the Image of God. Very interesting. He and his wife have 4 children. He's got his BA from Union, which I said, his MDiv from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and his PhD from Marquette University. And this is going to be interesting, right? Transhumanism, right? Pay attention. Please welcome Dr. Jacob Shatzer.
All right, thank you, Dan, and thank you for having me. You've already set the bar higher than I intended to because you promised that this would be interesting. When I teach a lot of different classes at Union, but one of my favorite classes to teach is Old and New Testament survey to freshmen. And one thing that I tell students when we begin the semester is that I have 2 rules in my class. 1, trust me. And 2, play along, because sometimes things don't make immediate sense right away, but they will eventually. And so I'm going to ask you to follow those 2 rules as well, because we're going to start somewhere that you might not expect that we would. How many of you remember the story Daniel in the Lion's Den? Okay, this is the audience participation part. You can all do this, right? Yes, we know Daniel in the Lion's Den. Now, when I was a child, this will make me seem old to you and young to your teachers. Maybe I remember Daniel in the Lion's Den told in Sunday school using something called a flannel graph. Does anyone remember a flannel graph? It's a nice green felt thing. There were like animals and shepherds, and all the characters could just be stuck to it. You all may remember the story of Daniel in the Lion's Den from VeggieTales, or is that even old? I don't know. See, some of these references just don't work anymore. It's changing too quickly. What I want you to do is think about Daniel in the Lion's Den with me for a moment, but what I'm going to challenge you to do is to look at it from a slightly different angle, an angle that will help us as we think about transhumanism and technology today. You'll remember the story of Daniel. He is, of course, a high-ranking official in the government. He is in favor with the king, and the other officials in the government don't like this, and they look for ways to frame him for wrongdoing. He, of course, is a righteous man. They can't find a charge against him, so they decide to invent one. They go to the king and they say, "King, we have this great idea. Let's make it the law for people to only pray to you for like a month." See, they knew that Daniel, of course, would not obey this law. They knew that he was a righteous man who worshiped only his God. So the king went along with it, and this becomes the law. And then we see Daniel. Now, you know what's going to happen here, but again, think for a moment. Trust me, play along. Consider this from a different angle. You know what Daniel does. But what I want to ask you is, what would you do if you were Daniel in this situation? I know what I would do. Daniel is a high-ranking government official. He knows the king. The king knows him. If I were Daniel, I would have taken control of the situation. I would have walked up to the king and I would have said, "Hey, come on. There's been a misunderstanding here." I've tried to make an explanation for what had gone wrong. I would have tried to insert myself and take control and try to make everything okay. And that's not what Daniel does. Picking up in verse 10 of Daniel 6, we read, "When Daniel learned that the document had been signed about the law, he went into his house. The windows in its upstairs room opened toward Jerusalem, and 3 times a day he got down on his knees, prayed, and gave thanks to his God, just as he had done before." You, of course, know the rest. He gets in trouble for breaking this law. He gets thrown in the lion's den, and we could go on with the story. But what I want to ask is, what do you see there? What is interesting? Like I said, if this were me, I would have tried to take control of the situation. I would have tried to get things in my own hands. I know the king. I can go talk to him. What we see here, I think, when we read this and we think about it that way is we realize some things about ourselves. One, we really like control. We really like to grab the bull by the horns and to do what we think needs done. In fact, we often forfeit God's peace in our lives because we grasp control rather than living in simple obedience to him as Daniel did. Right? Daniel just simply obeyed God, continued to do what he had done, and trusted that God would take care of him. So we see that we have this appetite for control. Second, we see that through this remarkable demonstration of faith, Daniel received God's protection, and he magnified God's superiority over the false gods. As the story goes on, what happens? People around the kingdom are commanded to worship Daniel's God, right? So we see God use Daniel not by having him take control of the situation, but by his simple obedience. And third, this is where we twist it a little bit and connect it to technology. I think sometimes we have to ask ourselves, how can our use of tools or technology encourage and shape us to want to grab things like control? How can they encourage and shape us and maybe tempt us to take a posture of control rather than a posture of obedience and faithfulness? Now, I'm not saying that those are necessarily always clearly opposite choices or anything like that, but I wanted to start here because I think sometimes when it comes to technology, we think we have it all figured out. We think that it's a simple decision. We use technology for good, but we don't use it for bad. All the while, we're buying into this worldview, this story, that control is always best when it's in our court, that it's always a good that we should grab for. At least here in the story of Daniel, we see that it's not necessarily. So as we think about tools, as we think about technology, you might think, why do we even need to worry too much about technology? I know you all have had presentations yesterday and this morning that have highlighted some of the remarkable nature of the situation that we find ourselves in. I think you probably recognize that the challenges that we face today with our technology and our tools are a little bit different than maybe the challenges that were faced 50 years ago or 100 years ago or 500 years ago. There are three things about our tools that have changed. I think I have this on my PowerPoint. Yes, good. Three things that have changed. So what I want to help you see here is that I don't want you to think, people are always worried about tools and what you do with your tools. No, I really think there's something different here, something newly challenging about today, something that we saw this morning in the talk about cybersecurity and the need for that. The first thing about tools that has changed is we see this increased speed of access and immersion, especially with digital technology. It used to be that you could pick up a tool and put it down, and we might still think we can somewhat do that, pick up our tools and put them down. But if we're being honest, we know that the speed with which we can access digital information and the immersive nature of our digital tools turns it up a little bit as far as the way these might impact us. There's a 24/7 nature to our technology, right? You talked yesterday, I know, about social media. There's certainly this always-on mentality. Corporations certainly know this. That's why corporations spend millions and billions of dollars on ads and figuring out more ways to engage you and your attention because that can be packaged and sold. It's immersive. Businesses see unprecedented opportunities. Hackers see unprecedented opportunities. So when we look at tools today, there is a little bit of a difference there. You've probably heard the adage, when you're holding a hammer, everything looks like a nail. We heard that, right? Which gets at this a little bit. The idea is that if you've got a hammer, you're going to be looking for things to use it. You might end up using it in times that aren't appropriate. Something might not be a nail. You think it's a nail, you hit it. There's a truth to that, but with this speed of access and immersive nature of our technology today, it's also a little bit different because we kind of know what a hammer's for, right? There's a limited range of things you can do with a hammer, some of them good, some of them bad. When we think about our tools today, it's like, imagine you have a hammer that you can also call your mom on, and you can watch videos on, and you can send messages to your friends on, and maybe you could still hit nails with it if you have a good enough case. Tools today are challenging in different ways than they were previously. Another way that we see this is that there are addictive characteristics with technology that we're seeing more and more. Studies are beginning to show that addiction to technology shows similar features as substance addiction. We all know and have heard about the dangers of drugs and alcohol because of their addictive properties. Some of the same physiological changes that can be observed in those who are addicted to drugs and alcohol are observed in more and more people your age and my age and older than all of us. Some of those same tendencies and physiological things are happening. People becoming addicted either to the devices themselves or maybe addicted to the feedback that we all like to get on our social media. I was going to say Facebook. You guys probably don't even use Facebook. I can't keep up with what people use now. So because of this speed of access, because of these addictive features, what we see here is that we are moving into an age where we aren't just talking about people who use tools or people who find technology useful for certain things, but instead we're moving to this place where we could refer to ourselves at some level as technological people. Technological people. Now, I mean this in a certain sense, so stick with me here for a moment. There's a quotation about this that's really helpful that I'm going to read to you. There is nothing wrong with technology per se, but there is something wrong with technological people. The difference between the two is that technology is merely a tool used to pursue substantial human ends, whereas technological people abandoned human ends in favor of exclusively technological ones. The former view is classical, the latter that of Silicon Valley dataists and transhumanists for whom human beings are themselves merely obsolete algorithms, soon to be replaced by synthetic ones far superior to them in every way. You might catch some things in that quote where you can see where we're starting to go, which is towards transhumanism, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. But what I want to help us see here is really this idea that drew me in my interest in transhumanism and technology and kind of underlies the reason that I wrote the book that I did, which is this. Most Christians, if you go up to them and say, hey, would you like to be a transhumanist? Sign here. Would say, nope. That's probably where most of you are. You probably saw the title on this one. You thought, transhumanism? Yeah, I don't want that. I'm just going to zone out for that one. Not interested in transhumanism. The fact of the matter is, however, that the way that we interact with our technology day in and day out, in little ways, actually forms us and shapes us, maybe even disciples us, to have some of the same values that transhumanists and posthumanists, those types of folks have. When we see the nature of technology and how interwoven it is with our way of being in the world, there are a couple really big terms that I want to connect you with and help you understand. Now, some might have said I should not use these big terms. You were all students, 7th to 12th grade, roughly. You guys can handle big terms, all right? So you got to focus here for a minute. We're going to use these big terms. The first is techno-social engineering. This comes from a book called Re-Engineering Humanity. And in this book, the authors argue that technologies and social forces align and impact how we think, perceive, and act. Techno-social engineering. If we work backwards, we get the idea of engineering, right? Designing something, building something. Social engineering would be designing, manipulating the way people interact in social situations and in society and things like that. Techno-social engineering, then, is recognizing the way that technologies themselves impinge upon human societies, human relationships, to maybe make them into forms that we wouldn't necessarily think that we want. So techno-social engineering, we got that one. Might not seem like such a big deal. We can figure that out, right? That's where our next big term comes in. Acute technological opacity or opacity. This is the idea that we are so often blind to these forces. They're hard to see. This is a problem. It makes it increasingly difficult to identify, seek, and secure the ultimate goal of ethics, a life worth choosing, a life lived well. This term does not come from a Christian theological perspective. This is drawn from a secular philosopher who's just trying to recognize the way technology is changing us. So if even those in the secular world can recognize that technology is shaping the way we think of ourselves and the way that we think of our communities and the way that we think about what it means to live a good life, and if even those from a secular perspective who have no interest in Christ or living a life in discipleship with Him, we should certainly recognize that problem, and we should certainly say, okay, how can we become a little less blind to this? It's hard for us to see what we need to see in order to make good decisions. So what we need to do is slow down, notice, and look closer, as well as using as much wisdom as we have to trace the trajectories that we might be taking. This then brings us to transhumanism. What I want you to entertain, maybe even just a little bit, is that maybe you are a little more transhuman than you might have thought you were when you came in here this morning. So what is transhumanism? I get this question a lot. It happens when you put a word like transhumanism in a book title. What is transhumanism? By transhumanism, I'm referring to a really broad and diverse group of people and organizations that basically are working on the idea that humans have been evolving for a very long time. We are now in a position where we can take control of our evolution. And we should do that. And we should decide what humans are going to be next. So the transhuman idea is moving beyond what it currently means to be human to whatever's next. Why just wait to see? Let's take control of it. What's interesting about this, like I said a few minutes ago, is probably most of you would say you would know better. You would say, no, I'm not supposed to, no, not transhumanism. I don't want to become something beyond human. I'm happy being human. But when we look at the values of transhumanism, we see some startling things. Some put this very bluntly, what they're after. There is a historian and futurist, Yuval Noah Harari, who writes this about humans. Listen carefully. This is astounding. Humans die due to some technical glitch. The heart stops pumping blood. The main artery is clogged by fatty deposits. Furthermore, every technical problem has a technical solution. We don't need to wait for the second coming in order to overcome death. A couple of geeks in a lab can do it. If traditionally death was the specialty of priests and theologians, now the engineers are taking over. What we see with transhumanism then is this notion that death itself can be overcome. Death itself can be overcome. It's just a technical problem, and for every technical problem, there's a technical solution. So there are 5 values that I want you to see with transhumanism. I'm going to run through these quickly so we can look at some ways that these values are put into practice, and so that we can look at some ways that maybe techno-social engineering is pushing us in that direction a little bit. So the first value that I want to talk about is perpetual progress. This is the idea that you've probably just imbibed being in the culture that we're in. The idea is things are always getting better. Computers are getting faster. Pharmaceutical companies are getting better at producing drugs that help deal with illness and disease. All these different things. There's a perpetual progress. Things are always getting better, and they will continue to get better. A lot of times we hear that and we kind of just buy into it because it just seems to be true. Because for most of us, we have a relatively limited time horizon. We've only been alive so long. So we hear about some bad stuff in history class maybe, but it seems like things are getting better here now. But what's interesting about this is when you have no clear goal, you have no clear direction that you're heading, how do you measure progress? Right? You can measure motion, you can measure change, but you can't measure progress if you don't have a goal. So one of the first values of transhumanism actually kind of turns in on itself and turns inside out. can we really say that things are always getting better if as a society we can't agree on what better is? So there's no clear goal here. A second value along with that is an intelligent technology or an intelligent approach to technology. This is, as I was talking about a little bit earlier, just the idea that, look, technology is getting better and better. We're going to be able to use it to solve more and more problems, which again, on its face value, is true. It is true. We've seen this, right? We've seen this. And this is what can make some of these values so alluring to us, can draw us in. We do see technology doing amazing and marvelous things that we can be thankful for. But as a value in and of itself, with no clear goal or no clear idea of what it means to be human, it can be dangerous. Third, transhumanists value an open society, by which they basically mean, let's not put a lot of rules in place about how people use technology. Let's let people try things out, and then we'll learn from that, and then we can develop in the direction that we want to go. I always use this example because it's really absurd to me, but in the literature on transhumanism, there's basically an argument like, look, if you want to have a tail, you should be able to have a tail. Open society. Let's not have silly rules like people can't put a robotic tail on themselves if they want. Let them have a tail if they want to have a tail. In other words, there's this commitment to just trying things. No one really knows what we're supposed to be or what we're supposed to do. So let's just be open. Let's try things. The fourth value is self-direction, which again is just pretty much a modern value that we often assume is a good thing. This cult of the self, this idea that you know who you are, or you know who you want to be, and you can be whatever you want to be. We all probably heard that at some level, either from a parent or a teacher that meant well. You can be whatever you want to be. Well, when you take that and you connect it to these technological possibilities that are now becoming possible, what do you end up with? You end up with this opportunity to, if you want, have a tail. And then the fifth value to hit briefly is just rational thinking, which again, on face value, sounds fine. Rational thinking, of course. We mean rational thinking a lot of times when we mean being thoughtful, like actually just thinking about something. But often the way this is used is not just being thoughtful, but rational thinking as opposed to having a space for revelation, for God to speak, for anything like that. We just should come down to rational arguments that we can make. So these five major values of transhumanism, help us see kind of the direction that transhumanists are heading, moving beyond what it means to be human to whatever we want humanity to be next. So what I do in my book and what I want to do here with the little bit of time we have remaining is kind of walk through some ways that we see this happening, beginning with, if you think of it as like flesh and blood over here, and you think of like technology and machines over here, we're going to look at kind of three steps. One is pretty much remaining flesh and blood humans, but changing a few things. The middle step is kind of finding ways that humans and machines can be interlaced into kind of hybrid beings. And then the third is out there uploading your mind to a computer and living eternally in the cloud or something, which we know is not necessarily secure. So this is good. These lessons all interweave together. So the first of these is what's referred to as morphological freedom. Morphological freedom. Christina Bieber-Lake says this about contemporary American culture. What we have in contemporary America is a society of individuals who think that their bodies are essentially plastic, who think of their lives as a project, who look to technology to solve their problems, who value individual autonomy above most other things, and who are enculturated to believe that money can buy happiness. This is hardly a robust definition of the good life. We see elements of this with this idea of morphological freedom. The idea is that morphological freedom means the ability to take advantage of whatever technology a person wants to in order to change their body in any way that they desire. Again, you see some of the values coming out there, right? We can make progress if we make some changes. Who should decide? Well, the individual, the self, should decide. We can do anything that we want. Just as Lake said, we view our bodies as plastic, as changeable. We think of our lives as a project. And for transhumanists, this is a right. You have the right to change yourself however you'd like to. There's a right to life. There's a right to happiness. There's a right to freedom. We've heard these. There's a right to one's own body. And therefore, there's a right to modify one's own body. This can take a lot of different forms. I mentioned earlier the one with the tail, just because it always sticks in my mind. And it sticks in my mind and probably sticks in yours because we probably share some sort of sense that humans aren't supposed to have tails. So it seems a little silly. But the fact that you think that it's silly shows that you're relying on resources that the secular world doesn't have. These transhumanists would say, who are you to say what it means to be human? We just happen to be the way we are by chance. Who are you to say it's silly to have a tail? Right? So morphological freedom, the right to change your body in any way that you want to. So how are we being nudged in this direction? When we go back to that techno-social engineering idea, I mean, think about what you do simply with social media and virtual reality. What are we encouraged to do? We're encouraged to see ourselves as a project of our own making that we can put out in the world, with putting our best face forward, whatever we would want to seem to be. In other words, even with creating a social media account, you all know this, right? You know, especially if you have like your best friend and you know them really well, and then you like look on their social media, you know there's some difference there because you know them well. You recognize it in yourself if you're really honest. If you're really honest, you know you put a little bit better front out there. You're trying to create a self, create an image of yourself that you think will get the reaction that you want. So we begin to be nudged in this direction. We don't notice it, that we're thinking of ourselves as projects of our own making. Sure, it's not quite as drastic as having a mechanical tail, but it's still nudging us to value that sense of self-direction, that sense of progress, that sense of openness that are the very values that underlie transhumanism. We see this also in virtual reality, right? When you're able to kind of create your avatar, if you will. You can create yourself however you want, right? There you really can have a tail, quite easy. It's not as difficult as a surgical tail. But again, what does that do? It's slowly teaching you to be comfortable with this idea that you are of your own making, that you should take control of who you're going to become based on what you think would be good. So again, you might not think that you're that interested in transhumanism. And I'm not saying there's a slippery slope. If you have a Facebook account, you're going to become a robot. I'm not saying that. But we can see some ways that these values begin to shape us. The second then, so that first one is kind of staying mostly with flesh and blood. The second is more of a merging between the two. And we see this in things like augmented reality. Augmented reality is overlaying graphics on the real world. It also includes things like referred to as life expansion, integrating human and machine in bodies and in environments. And oftentimes, I guess the easiest example of this on a small scale that you're probably aware of is like Google Glass. Do you remember those a few years? I guess they still exist. They're just not in the news as much. I could be wearing them. I'm not. But what these glasses can do is they can overlay digital information onto the real environment. And so what it could do, perhaps, like if I had these and Dan had provided me with some sort of database beforehand with all of your facial, like with your pictures and with information about you, these glasses could work so that I could mingle about you, walk around here in the break, and it would maybe like pop up with your name right above your head, and I'd be able to talk to you like I knew you, and you'd be a little freaked out. Like, how'd you know my name, right? Now, there's some features of that we could think might actually be useful, right? But what we often don't think about is, what if that included your GPA? What if it flashed up in blue with little fireworks if you were an A student, but like if you were really struggling, it was like red with a little skull and crossbones by it. So I knew not even to bother talking to you because, I mean, come on. You might think that sounds silly, but with augmented reality, we often think of the fun little ways that it could be used, but we don't recognize the ways that it could radically alter the way we interact with each other and the way we interact with our world. What if you have the ability to know crime statistics as you're going through a particular community? That sounds really good, right? Like if you're following your GPS and it's going to route you around places that have a lot of crime. That can sound helpful, and it is at some level. What does that also mean for the people who are trying their best to run honest businesses in those areas? And you're just being filtered around them simply because of an algorithm and because the way that information is overlaid onto reality, so you can't even distinguish the two anymore. So what we see here is that with this idea of augmenting the digital and the real world, there are certainly some interesting things, some ways we could imagine that tool being used in harmless ways. But we also have to recognize that it could be used in harmful ways, and it would also radically change the way we experience human relationships, human community. It would change the way we experience places, what it means to be in a place, to live in a place. We see this, of course, being nudged in this direction pretty overtly. Wearable tech, Google glasses, smart glasses more broadly, virtual reality, layers. You probably have seen this on commercials, right? You can use your smartphone and you're like, I like this couch. What would it look like in my house? And you can hold it there. It'll show you what that couch would look like, right? Relatively harmless, but again, we're being nudged in this direction to think more and more of merging these worlds. Again, a quote by Harari, the historian I mentioned earlier, who thinks we don't need Jesus to come back because we have geeks in labs. He says this: devices such as Google Glass and games such as Pokemon Go, remember that one? It's still around, right? Are designed to erase the distinction between online and offline, merging them into a single augmented reality. On an even deeper level, biometric sensors and direct brain-to-computer interfaces aim to erode the border between electronic machines and organic bodies and to literally get under our skin. Once the tech giants come to terms with the human body, they might end up manipulating our entire bodies in the same way they currently manipulate our eyes, fingers, and credit cards. We may come to miss the good old days when online was separated from offline. What we see there is that this is certainly not just an easy, simple, not something to worry about, but it's a fundamental change to the way we view reality. And it's one that we're being nudged toward, even if we're not putting on Google glasses. All right, so that's the middle one. That's kind of the merging of the two. What about the third, the kind of complete departure from the human body? We're here in the realm of artificial intelligence, mind uploading, things like that. Transhumanists don't mince words about how they feel about the human body. Again, there's some diversity here, but basically the human body is viewed as a meat suit. A meat suit, that's a term that's bandied about and used. The body is just a meat suit. Wouldn't it be nice to have a hardware upgrade? We see this with mind uploading, which is still very much a sci-fi, anybody's guess kind of thing, right? Experts disagree on whether or not it would even be possible to take a human brain and completely copy it over into zeros and ones on a hard drive. So there are different ways that experts think maybe this could be done. And even if you do that, what do you have once you, you got my brain, and somehow they've scanned it all into my iPad. What do we have now? Right? There's two of us now, right? My consciousness isn't in the iPad, it's just a copy of my mind, right? So a lot of this, we really are in the realm of sci-fi here. The other two, we're seeing a lot of those opportunities and things that are happening, but with mind uploading or digital eternal life, a lot of experts don't think it's possible. Maybe copies, but not digital eternal life. But still, we're beginning to think about and interact with more and more artificial intelligence, we can imagine a little bit more what it might be like to live eternally, digitally, interacting with artificial intelligences. It used to be that artificial intelligence was fairly narrow. It was task-specific. So you might be able to create an artificial intelligence that could kill weeds in a field. Right? So there are these machines that are used in agriculture that are good at identifying weeds and spraying the weeds and not spraying the good things. All right? So that's narrow artificial intelligence. But many technologists are working towards what's referred to as artificial general intelligence. This would be like if that machine that knew how to kill weeds in the field could decide to change careers and run away and join the circus and become a clown. I know that maybe is a little silly, which no one laughed, so that's okay. But it's actually that notion of running away and joining the circus, that's when we'll know we're in trouble with artificial intelligence, I'm telling you. When your Siri runs away and joins the circus, because that shows some really adaptability and an ability to work outside the realm of reason. It doesn't really make sense for many people to join the circus. Now, if you're incredibly flexible, maybe that's your path. I don't know. But for most of us, it makes no sense to join the circus. It doesn't make any sense at all to go in that direction. When we're looking at artificial general intelligence, in other words, we're looking at the ability for artificial intelligences to recognize new fields of information that they want to learn or new tasks that they want to be able to emulate. And so there are advances that are being made in artificial general intelligence where we're seeing where that line is going to be. What are these intelligences going to be? How will we interact with them, right? So even if we're not sure that we can upload our minds and become digitally immortal, we're still moving towards a day where the artificial intelligences in our lives will be much less artificial and much more intelligent. Maybe they will run away and join the circus. They will be able to tell better jokes than Siri can tell, which my kids still love, that you can ask, Siri, tell me a joke. But they're young enough, they think they're funny. We're coming at this where we're beginning to interact more and more with these intelligences. And the question is going to become pretty soon, is Siri a person? Is Alexa a person? What do we do with them? Do they have rights? Or maybe, actually the one that you're going to face sooner, this is going to be my one prognostication. I'm going to tell you about your future. There's going to come a time where you're going to have a relative who is very old and frail and needs care. And you're going to need to decide if you're going to care for them or if you're going to put them in a home where robots will care for them. Now, maybe there'll still be a few humans involved, but maybe for companionship, they have a pet seal that's artificially intelligent. You laugh, that's already real. One of the books actually that I noticed in the booklet, Sherry Turkle's book, Alone Together, one of her chapters is on these seals that were given to elderly people because no one wanted to talk to them or build relationships with them, and they recognized that they needed companionship. Right now, the Christian church makes a big deal about being against abortion. We don't kill babies, right? This is a big, hot cultural topic. I think that maybe in 10 or 20 years, one of the distinguishing factors of a life following Christ will be not just not doing euthanasia, not killing elderly people, but like not just giving them robots and leaving them alone. All right, so these questions about transhumanism don't just hit us in, am I going to decide to be transhuman or not? No, they hit us in these small ways. They shape the way we think about reality. They introduce these problems to us they're really major problems. Questions like, what does it mean to be human? Right? It's a question of theological anthropology. In other words, what does it mean to be human in light of who God is and what God has revealed? What does it mean to be human? What is the main problem for humans? Right? That's the doctrine of sin. What is the main problem for humans? Well, from a technological transhumanist perspective, the problem isn't sin, it's that you just need one more upgrade. Another question that we're faced with is, how can that problem be solved? If you really believe that every problem is simply a technological problem, then every problem has a technological solution. But if every problem has a technological solution, that means salvation is only technological. It raises the question, well, why did Jesus take on flesh? Why did the eternally existent second person of the Trinity, fully God, put on a meat suit, which is a terrible way of understanding the incarnation, okay? He didn't just put on a meat suit. He took on everything that it means to be human, which is more than just having a meat suit. Sorry, I teach theology as well, and sometimes I spin off. Why would the second person of the Trinity take on flesh? Just get us out of our meat suits? No. What we see is that these questions have historic, biblically grounded answers. And when these questions come straight on at us, a lot of times, especially if you're from a place like Prestonwood Christian Academy, the questions can't come at you straight on because you know better. If somebody comes at you and says, let me tell you why you don't need Jesus, you're going to be like, whoa, hold on. I'm watching out for you. But these things come in sneaky little ways that we're blind to. Because they come in little decisions that we make about what does it mean to be human right now? What does it mean to try to use technology in a way that honors God but does not replace God? I think one small step in that is back where we started, which is with Daniel in the lion's den. Our appetite for control is not always bad. Part of being made in the image of God and being given the mandate that God gave us to be in his image and to be in this world means we're going to have control sometimes. But our appetite for control, I think, has grown out of control. So one little thing that we can do is try to just challenge that. Maybe I shouldn't always be in control. Maybe more important than being in control is being someone who relies upon God, who looks to him in faith in simple ways, even as we seek the complex ways that we will continue to interact with our technology, but in a way that does not place it on a pedestal, that does not make it an idol, but continues to worship God. Thank you.